Okay, two tasks that I want to take you through this afternoon. But just before I do, I want to remind you that everything that you have in hard copy form is available for you electronically. Now, John, is there any time limit on that? That it's going before these materials will be available? Okay, so website and available through RLCs, including the PowerPoint presentations that Anne and I have produced, as well as all of the other materials. So the materials from this morning, materials from Anne, available for you electronically to, remember, amend in the light of your own context. Now this afternoon, the last two things that we're going to spend time on is, in the first instance, we're going to look at who does what in reading assessment. Now inside the Module 3 Examples of Data Gathering Techniques folder, the file, I think it's the second last page or the last page, is headed up with a two-column sheet, who does what in reading assessment. I'd like you to take that out and just have it at the table with you, and then I'll set up the task. It's a white sheet. Who does what in reading assessment? In the first package from this morning. This piece of material, I consulted with the Cambridge University the Cambridge University Assessment for Learning Network, looking at the distinctive roles that school leaders or principals play in partnership with teachers. So there's an implicit shared leadership element here, even though you've got a two-column approach. You'll see it fairly clearly. So they're asking the question, who does what in assessment? And you'll see right at the top of that page, it indicates that whether you're in the United Kingdom, the United States or in Australia, there are mandated system requirements that are part and parcel of the testing process, if I use Anne's language more precisely. So NAPLAN and other mandated tests are there as requirements. So right at the top of the two-column page, principals and classroom teachers, you see we've just got a compliance issue to deal with. Principals have to do this, teachers have to do that. Full stop. In my home state in Queensland, there are other mandated tests, not just NAPLAN. Now, I don't know whether you've got other mandated tests in South Australia, have you? Coming soon to a place near you. All right. In New Zealand, they have not had mandated tests until a change of government recently wants to introduce them. They've had dip sampling tests, which we once had in Australia. We had dip sampling across the year levels rather than mandated whole population tests each year of the whole cohort. So different things apply in different jurisdictions. So at the top of that two-column sheet, you'll see that there is, for principals, you've just got to manage the mandated requirements in literacy assessment or anything else, and similarly teachers have got to comply with that. So the main purpose of this is to ask you to have a roundtable discussion about the different tasks for whom or for which principals and teachers are responsible, and then to look at this particular document and see whether it would be useful to you as a roundtable discussion document with your teachers, given that it's implicit that there's a shared leadership function, which I'm hoping you'll see in this document. So I'm going to give you about 10 to 15 minutes maximum just to talk your way through this document, thinking about how you might use it, if it would be useful to you back in your workplace, or amended how it might be useful back in your workplace. So we've got about 10 minutes or so it's over to you. I know there's lots of competing demands amongst you, and thank you for trying to stay with the task, those of you who have got many, many other things on your minds. This particular piece of work out of the Cambridge University Assessment for Learning Network provokes discussions about the complementary nature of the work of teachers and principals. The table that I was at 2 or 3 people talking about using this to clearly articulate the different roles so that both teachers and principals know what's expected of each other. A couple of important points come forward, not the least of which is the relationship that exists between steps 1 and 2 on both sides. They are directly related. In fact, you can't really identify priorities on which attention ought to be directed unless there's agreement on the use of whole school diagnostic reading assessment instruments, and those instruments have actually brought forward with data the kinds of priorities that you think you should be dealing with. So there's a relationship between those two things, and it will be ongoing. The other thing that's not there so much that I thought I should emphasise is that Anne's been very strong on the notion that there are a wide range of devices, tools that teachers can use to try to find out what children can do. And I was really encouraged by the fact that she takes what is an advocacy view for the positive side of what the child can do. So we could take a deficit view and say, look, let's look at what the kid can't do. She doesn't argue that. You use your instruments to actually find out what the child can do and take the child forward. She also indicated to you that tests that are norm referenced or normative based tests, they can still be used diagnostically, so they're not necessarily all of them due for the scrap heap. That's fair comment, Anne, isn't it? So they're not all due for the scrap heap, so don't be concerned about the array that you have unless you've still got teachers who are trying to actually produce norm data or standardised data and reading ages as a result of that lock people in beyond the years that they're useful for. Okay, so I'm going to just ask you to focus on item E in the right-hand column. Implement the classroom assessment plan using achievement data to develop whole class, group and individual strategies for reading improvement. Well, what kind of classroom assessment practices do teachers use? I'm going to ask you to return to the A3 sheet that Anne started the day with, the two-sided A3 sheet. One side is school assessment practices, the other side is broken down into year level clusters. F to 2, foundation to year 2, 3 to 5, 6 to 7. I want you to have that just in front of you. I'm not going to ask you to fill anything out in this, but we know from past expressions of this that there is often a lot written in the F to 2 row. And it is possible to find teachers in the 6 to 7 row who can't write a lot. And it's possible as you run through this F to 2 and 6 to 7 set of groupings all the way through to the top, that you'll find some kind of a tabular representation of what occurs in the school with leanings towards predominantly comprehension as you move further up the school, with little knowledge contained or available or used by the teachers in other aspects of the Big Six. So, having that in front of you, I'd like you to have a conversation for your last 10-minute conversation on what are the 3 steps that you would take, that you do take or that you would take in order to ensure that you've got a well-documented classroom assessment program, at least at the level of documentation for teachers. What kind of steps do you need to take as a leader? You may already have something in place and they might be confirming steps. You may not. The table discussion about what are the steps that you need to take to get that kind of chart completed, at least across the clusters that you use. I hear you use the notion of learning communities inside many of your schools. Use those. So I'm looking for at least 3 steps, and this will be the last opportunity for Leonie to rove with the microphone and find 3 people to tell us, well, what 3 steps would you take to ensure that you have a classroom assessment program using this particular template available to you? So you've got 10 minutes. 3 steps for you as principal.
What we were talking about is about having whole staff agreements, having an action plan and using your performance development processes to ensure the commitment and team approach to using the data and the plans. And the PLCs. So if you use PLCs or teams or whatever you like to call them in your school, and using that as a shared leadership approach.
Well, we talked about being strategic about, what, who, when, but the most important thing is how you use the assessments. And we talked about Anne's point that, for some of the assessments we've looked at today, you may only do them under certain circumstances. And we talked a bit about the difference between a school-wide approach and that some teachers may within that have their own particular things that they also want to assess. And we did talk a bit about formative assessment and that ongoing assessment and how that's recorded.
Yes, well, Anne will spend quite a deal of time in Module 4 because at the moment all that we've done in Module 3 is put in front of you the need to gather evidence. Remember the need to gather evidence about children's achievements, what they can do in reading in order to be able to take them somewhere further, but we haven't spent any time on strategies to take them further except with Anne's pink sheet towards the end. It just gives you a little bit of a taster. If this is the case, what then? That's the begged question, isn't it? So obviously in Module 4, where we'll be dealing with the planning and implementation of interventions, interventions are all about strategy, aren't they? They're all about doing things differently in order to take the child from where he or she is to somewhere further. And of course it's doing it in a way which is resource effective, knowing full well that the amount of time that a particular individual struggling child needs will be quite demanding, and that needs to be put into the context of whole class teaching in order to understand that the resources available to us as teachers with our time is being used for the widest number for the best possible purpose. I might just say here that, of course, thinking ahead, a little ahead of you, I would, if I were using this as a school leader, I'd be saying, well, what have I got in this folder that Anne's got me to put together under each of the elements of emergent literacy, oral language, phonological awareness and so on. And here is this school or year level or learning community grouping chart. What can I note on this chart that we have in the folder that Anne's given me? What can I note on this chart that we have and use at our school? Because ultimately, if you were to collect these, and this is where the leadership issue becomes quite critical, if you were to have your reception to year 2 or prep to year 2, 3 to 5 do this, 6 and 7 do this, ultimately you need to be able to take that and say, this is our whole school profile. And as a leader of the school, you would then know where the common elements lie across the school, because you may well have argued that there be some common elements across the school, and you would then know what is being used in particular year levels. That's an important document, and I would argue assuming a greater significance these days than it did in days of yore. That was another word from the dictionary.com, days of yore. Because we are so heavily into the accountability agenda, aren't we? So knowing what the assessment practices are across the year level groupings that you use to share leadership of literacy assessment in the school is a critical accumulative task for the leader to know and understand. So ultimately you need a chart of some kind. Electronically the better, so that you can patch in and patch out as new decisions are taken and changes occur. If you listen to Anne Baetto, every 5 years you'd be pulling stuff out and putting new stuff in, wouldn't you? Okay, well, that brings us to a close on those activities. I want you then, just for the last couple of moments, to turn to page 7 in the book, the module booklet, the one with the pretty cover on the front. Your homework task here, we're not asking you to spend 15 minutes on it between now and module 4, and we're not asking you to spend 15 minutes on it now. We're asking you to spend some time on it, because we'll look at the very bottom part of that by saying that we're asking you, the last paragraph, we're asking you to put into place before module 4 enough assessment that you may already have done or that you may have used previously in order for you to understand where significant issues in reading difficulty lie in your school. So you should come to module 4 saying, yes, we've got evidence in the lower school that this is a data-informed priority for us. Or yes, we've got evidence in the upper school that we are not working sufficiently well on this. So just so that you are well prepared to participate in the planning processes for putting interventions in place to improve reading in module 4. There is nothing more specific than that. It is really up to you to look at what you've been doing. Have I got sufficient evidence across the range of the big 6? Use that planning sheet that we've just been focusing on as a guide, and be able to say, yes, I'm pretty sure that my teachers and I feel that we should be doing more about X and Y with these children at these levels. Could it be a whole school priority? Of course. Could it be a small component of the school? Of course. It's up to you. It's where the data tells you you should be centering activity. And if you come with that in your mind, we will be in a position then for you to be thinking about strategies to take the work forward as we go through the planning of interventions that hopefully make a difference.